In this video, we're going to focus on lipids. Lipids are the fats and oil that you have seen in everyday life. Lipids include triglycerides, fatty acid, phospholipids, wave and steroids. Lipids are non-polar, which means that they are mostly hydrophobic. They don't mix well with water. Lipids are mostly made up of carbon-hydrogen bonds. Sometimes they contain other elements like nitrogen in phospholipids. CH bonds are non-polar and because of CH bonds, why lipids are hydrophobic. Lipids such as triglycerides are an example of long-term storage of energy if you are in diet or if you are not eating for more than a day. After your body burns out all the carbohydrates or the sugar molecules, the next thing are the triglycerides in your system and uses enzymes like lipase to break down triglycerides into fatty acid and glycerol so that our body can obtain energy from these molecules. Your body can survive days without food because of these triglycerides molecules. In fact, they can store more than twice the amount of energy compared to carbohydrates. Lipids or fats also cushions the vital organs. It insulates our body from the cold and serves as our fuel storage tank and keeping our demanding metabolic system operating. And lastly, lipids also insulate the body. We have a layer of fat just below our skin that helps to keep our internal body temperature regular despite the external temperature.
So let's talk about these lipids one at a time. First, we have fatty acids. What are fatty acids? Fatty acids are long chains of hydrocarbons that contain a carboxylic acid functioning group at the end. So, here's an example of a fatty acid. So, this represents a carbon atom that contains hydrogen atom. Carbon can only form 4 bonds, 2 hydrogen atoms in the middle, and at the end possess 3 hydrogen atoms. So, fatty acid is mostly made up of hydrocarbons. The carboxylic acid portion of fatty acid is the polar part. The polar part that like water. The hydrophilic part. And the tail of the fatty acid is the nonpolar part, the hydrophobic part that doesn't like water. This type of fatty acid is called saturated fatty acid. It contains the maximum number of hydrogen atoms that you can pack on this molecule. There are no double bonds in this fatty acid and it's solid at room temperature. Good example of this are palmitic acids. In unsaturated fatty acid, there is a kink in this structure. So that's an example of an unsaturated fatty acid. For every double bond present, you lose 2 hydrogen atoms. It also tends to be liquid at room temperature. Now, let's talk about triglycerides. When we say triglyceride, it is the simple lipid. It can take the form of a solid or a liquid at room temperature. It also circulates the blood. Fatty acid and glycerol are the main components of triglycerides. Take a 3-carbon molecule called glycerol or alcohol, and we're going to react it with 3 fatty acids. The first fatty acid is called saturated fatty acid. The second one is a monounsaturated fatty acid because we only have one double bond. And when you have multiple double bonds, it is called polyunsaturated fatty acid. A triglyceride is composed of 3 fatty acid molecules and 1 glycerol molecule. Now, to make it a triglyceride, we need a dehydration synthesis reaction. So, we're going to lose water. The molecule will be dehydrated due to the loss of water and synthesize a larger compound. And this will produce triglyceride. So this molecule is very useful for long-term energy storage. and that's one of its major functions. Triglycerides is nonpolar and it doesn't mix well with water. It doesn't have the polar hydroxyl groups. To make it simple, in order to make a triglyceride, we need to react one glycerol with 3 fatty acids, and that's going to make the triglyceride, producing 3 water molecules, and that is dehydration synthesis reaction.
These are lipids with the phosphate group. A phospholipid is made up of a phosphate group, alcohol, and two fatty acid. In this example, we have a saturated fatty acid and unsaturated fatty acid. The R group does contain nitrogen atom. Phospholipids contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and nitrogen. Phospholipids make up cell membrane.
This is the phospholipid barrier. Phospholipid has a polar end and two nonpolar cells. The kink that you see in the structure is due the presence of this double bond and the insaturated fatty acid. The phosphate group is polar, so it's like water, so that's the part that's going to passing water. The two fatty acid tails doesn't like water, so this is the hydrophobic region of the cell membrane. That's the part that wants to stay away from water. So this will be the inside of the cell, which is accused it has water, and this is outside of the cell, but the membrane of the cell is the interior is hydrophobic.
The next type of lipid that we need to talk about are waxes. Waxes are nonpolar. They don't mix with water. Waxes contain very long acyl chains, as you can see in this picture above. But they can have many different functional groups. Here we have a paraffin wax with 31 carbon atoms. The functional group is an alkane. An alkane is an organic molecule that only contains carbon and hydrogen. It doesn't have any double bonds, so it's a saturated compound. Below we have a wax ester. We still have two long acyl chains, but we do have an ester functional group, so it's called a wax ester. This one has 32 carbon atoms and 64 hydrogen atoms. So these are very long hydrophobic molecules. Some examples of waxes include beeswax on the waxes that plant use to coat themselves, and even candles. Candles are made up of waxes, specifically the paraffin wax. Waxes have very high melting points. This particular paraffin wax has a melting point of 99 degrees Fahrenheit and its boiling point is 698 degrees Fahrenheit. So at room temperature, waxes are solids, but if you raise the temperature, you can melt them into a liquid. Notice also that birds can still fly during rainy days because their feathers do not absorb water and repulse it instead because of the wax covering. Now, the next one is steroids. Steroids contain 4 fused rings. First is cholesterol. Cholesterol is used to maintain fluidity of the cell membrane. It is essential to humans and animals in producing vitamin D. It is also the starting point from which steroid hormones necessary to reproduction, such as estrogen and testosterone, are formed. Next, we have estradiol, which is a type of estrogen, the primary female sex hormone. And the other one is testosterone, which is an androgen, and that is the primary male sex hormone. Estradiol and testosterone They're chemically similar besides both having four fused strings. They also both have this hydroxyl group at the top, but estradiol really stands out due to the presence of this aromatic ring, which is not present in testosterone or in cholesterol. Cortisol is another steroid hormone that is used to reduce inflammation by suppressing the immune system. Now, let's say if you're stressed out, when your stress levels are high, your cortisol level will be high as well. Now, when used as medication, cortisol is known as hydrocortisone. So these are some steroids which are lipids that you may need to know.